I think the question of insurance and the question of floor levels under the Building Act and floor levels under the Resource Management Act are related, but they don't necessarily correlate. So in terms of insurers, the insurance companies are all different in terms of what risk they will accept. But that is their business. They want to sell insurance, and what they're doing is underwriting that risk for people. So there's no question in my mind that they'll go off risk in all our flood management areas or for floor level and fill management areas across the city. I mean, those are mapped for an extreme event, and that's what insurance is there for. And similarly, the Building Act levels, the 1 in 50 event is still an extreme event. It's not the sort of event that you expect every couple of years. You don't expect those to come along that often. So the floor level has to be pretty low in terms of putting a house at risk of frequent flooding coming through the living room, and it has to be much lower than anything that is required under the Building Act today or even in the last 10, 20 years.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, with our conversations with the community, whether we might look at having a resource people such as Duncan Webb or Dean Lester or people there, just as was that going too far, broadening the conversation too much?
No, well, I think that the hub, they're going to have a broader range. I think RAS and CS have kind of been brought into the picture. But I kind of want to repeat that there'll be none of these houses that are marked blue here, even dark blue, that aren't in the current floor level and fill management areas. So these people are already, in preparation. The problem for me has always been that for people who repair, they don't get an opportunity to mitigate against that risk. So because they're not building to the new floor levels. That's my issue. It's always been repair. If you're rebuilding, of course you can protect yourself in these areas as you can in the floor level and fill management areas. It's kind of only what I've been banging on about for 4 years. You've obviously not been listening to me.
I know,
Councillor.
and I remember Eurasian put out, but the insurers hold out on them by saying, oh, your foundational damage doesn't hit the threshold
exactly.
of all this business. So,
yeah, no, it's a huge area. Andrew and then Paul.
Thank you. A couple of questions. The comments that have been made about the floor management and fill areas, obviously a lot of work historically was done in the city. There wasn't that same amount of work as I understand it done in Banks Peninsula. Does that mean that there might be more of a surprise about some of this, for example, to a person sitting in Purao than there would to a person sitting in New Brighton? Should we be anticipating that?
Yes, that's true. So there've not been floor level controls over and above those in the Building Act out on Banks Peninsula. So we now have these floor level controls through Little River. So there's a floor level and fill management area for Little River, and where these coastal inundation zones are mapped out on Banks Peninsula, there are floor level controls introduced through the district plan.
Okay, so that's a new thing just through this district plan review.
Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, if people have been watching that, they'll be aware of it from
yes.
the. Yeah. Okay. Yes. And then second question: the presentation that we've seen this morning, is that the basis of the public meeting? Like this presentation will also be shown at those public meetings?
Yes, although I did add a little more detail in about the models for this morning, but yes, that is the basis of the ones that we'll use for the public meetings.
Okay, and the dates of the public meetings, like there are some provisional dates put out, but they haven't been confirmed, have they, as yet?
Yes, they have been confirmed.
They have?
Yep.
So,
all right.
Well, it would be quite good to get those dates and we can repeat them online, so it would be good.
Yeah,
I think they will be up online.
That was my next question. How would people find out?
It would be good if I could just sort of say the dates are these, or you could say these dates.
We'll give you the 2 sets of dates, the dates specifically for the Tonkin and Taylor report and talking about coastal inundation and erosion, and then the dates also for the district plan review drop-ins.
Yeah, so there is a hub one, and I also know that the community leaders meeting last night, when the council sort of said we'll be coming out, with these public events, there was a little bit of, well, hang on a minute, we might actually have a better way of communicating with our community. So we've left that open so people can come back, you know, the sort of Paul Zarnans, etc. of this world, you know, South Brighton Residents Association, you know, that there's a lot of, you know, idea that rather than having one big meeting, that smaller meetings, you know, the opportunity for a lot more people to ask questions and do so in a, you know, sort of a friendly environment, you know, that's what we're trying to encourage. Yeah, Paul and then Vicky.
It's just on, just carrying on from what you were talking about with the people who have who are doing repairs and don't have the opportunity to actually remediate for coastal inundation. The other issue is that with these non-consented repairs, is that we're finding that some buildings, in actual fact, that are on poles are actually getting lowered because they've lowered further into the issue where flooding could occur. So where the piles been sunk in different spots in the house through the earthquake, what the repairers are doing is taking it to the lowest point, so essentially lowering the
We
building.
actually have found one of those examples. People refer to more than one, but there is one definite example where that has occurred, where the insurer didn't have to get, well, it might have been EQC, but they didn't have to get a building consent because of the number of piles that were affected. And so they lowered, this is alongside the Heathcote River, unbelievable that they were allowed to do that.
I just wonder though, with these non-consenting issues, whether we need to have some mechanism in these flood level and fill management areas, some mechanism where they have to be consented when it's anything to do with the foundation. I
don't know that we can change the consent rules in our district plan, but I wonder whether, are we able to require that that floor levels aren't lowered in these areas? I mean, is that possible?
These are works being carried out under the Building Act, I understand, rather than the Resource Management Act. So the Resource Management Act rules and the District Plan rules are only triggered when someone needs to apply for a resource consent.
Yeah, and that's the problem. All right. We need a solution. Because it is, I mean, you know, apocryphal stories aren't, you know, actual evidence, but there is a case. They have found the case where the floor levels were lowered, so smoothing the foundations so that they went down. So they got a level house but a lower house. It's not good. Vicky?
Basically for the next chapter, just so there's no surprises when we come to it, the impact of the Alpine fault line and just what it may mean. I just spent an hour with a geotech engineer, what that could or might mean across the South Island actually, and just, I don't notice it anywhere, so just a heads up that it would be nice to have them on that. But for the next one, I'm assuming. But now if you want to.
Yeah, that's right. GNS and a student at the University of Canterbury actually a couple of months ago gave quite a decent series of talks on the Alpine fault rupture. In a nutshell, mayhem. Absolute, you know, West Coast, anybody on the Alpine Divide, it's going to, you know, it will be catastrophic. Christchurch, it will be significant. What you're talking about is obviously lesser ground accelerations, probably in the order around 0.3 Gs, but for prolonged duration. So we're talking 1.5, 2 minutes plus. So what you'd expect there in the eastern suburbs is the old L word again. And the associated damage, you would expect some sort of basin subsidence. How much, we're not sure. And then obviously there will be some stuff going on in the Port Hills as well. Not to the magnitude that we've experienced, but we do expect some slope stability there.
It was interesting to hear how there was a lake in Fiordland that they were able to actually measure the last 26 eruptions of the Alpine fault line and the reasonably regular interval and how long it's been. And but I'm just wondering if there is. It was quite fascinating in terms of the length of the time that an event would take. The geotech engineer I was speaking to was saying many of the buildings, because they've been constructed in the manner in which they have, would be quite safe in Christchurch. He was talking about some buildings in other parts of the South Island that wouldn't be, but just, is there anything different or unusual that we should be learning from what we now know about that we haven't included in our natural hazards chapter, is really the question. Whether you can answer that now or when we come to that next.
Well, I mean, I think that what's obvious is that in the natural hazard space, the risk of flooding and the liquefaction-prone status of the land are inextricably linked to each other. So,
but I'm thinking of, is there something that we should have included that we haven't? Obviously, we've included that.
In coastal inundation and coastal...
No, but in the
natural hazards chapter.
Yeah.
We're going to move on to the natural hazards chapter.
I know, that's why I'm just warning him that I'm going to ask those questions.
Well, I think
If you know something about the Alpine faults and why we haven't provided.
You can do it in the next one if it's more helpful.
There's nothing in particular about the Alpine fault event itself.
It's any different from another event.
The probabilistic approach to the ground shaking intensity for Christchurch take into account all the sources, the Alpine fault, the Porter's Pass fault, which would both probably give us pretty serious shaking as well as other local sources that you're familiar with. So as Ian's pointed out, we'd get the same effects. It's the duration of shaking, which is the major one. And if you shake anything long enough, it eventually cools to bit. 2 minutes of shaking is an awfully long time, even at relatively gentle amounts. I think for the Christchurch.
probably get seasick, I think, if it's anything else.
Yeah. So you're going to get very similar effects.
But also I should add, I'm sorry, that those natural hazards were dealt with in the stage 1 set of chapters,
No.
and we are expecting a decision on that fairly shortly.
So just the question, and you don't need to answer it now, is there anything that you can think of as a geotech engineer that we should have included in this part, the natural hazards, not the coastal inundation? Because I appreciate...
But this is what this part is. We've already done the first part of the natural hazards chapter.
No, I
Simple
know.
answer.
Just checking.
I can't think of anything else. I mean, we've studied earthquakes and their effects, so for us in our city, we know what will pretty much happen, and that's been captured.
Yeah, I think that dealing with the two parts of the one chapter in a separate way probably hasn't necessarily been as helpful to public understanding as it could have been, because in some ways looking at the floor level and fill management areas at the same time as looking at these would show that the pictures are pretty much the same, except on the Banks Peninsula where it hasn't been mapped. And there are new mapping areas here, but they've now been included in the floor level and fill management areas anyway. So I think we're getting to understand a lot more about our city. But I think that to raise the issue about the impact of the Alpine fault, I think it drifts into the area that I was drifting into before, which is the building code and the Building Act. And actually the requirements around foundations in the areas that are most susceptible that have remained available for development. I mean, that phrase TC3 sort of caused all sorts of horror, but it was designed to provide foundations that would readily either absorb or be easily to straighten houses without lowering them. The structures that are being put in place now are actually secured against that, but you cannot remove the risk. It's going to happen one day, and it's a question of how do you best ensure that you're in a good position to do more than just demolish buildings and start all over again. We actually want to be able to retain the economic value of our properties and our communities, our homes.
What I hadn't appreciated was how long that shaking lasted.
Well, then you are the only person in the room that didn't know that. I mean, everyone knows that it's going to last for over a minute. Everyone.
Well, no, it's was a lot more than a minute
Yeah,
that
but
this person was telling.
but the point is that the extent of the shaking, in terms of the in terms of the impact that it has on the land, is liquefaction and lateral spread. That's what the impact is. So in the areas that are susceptible to liquefaction, we have written rules about the type of building you can build.
And I totally get that, but there was quite a lot of new information, and I just wanted to make sure that we had incorporated as much as possible of what we've learned, because obviously Christchurch has been a learning lab for earthquakes in the last 4 years, dramatic learning lab, and I just wanted to make sure that we had included that. But you're telling me, as the expert in the field, that you think you've included everything that we know.
I really don't want to create this level of anxiety and uncertainty
I'm not either.
injected into a conversation that we're having around coastal inundation and coastal erosion. This component of the natural hazard chapter, and I mean, I strayed into this area too when I agreed with Paul that lowering the the platform for a house in a risky area is madness. It's extreme madness. But the answer we got was that the natural hazards chapter of our district plan itself, cannot deal with that issue. The issue is a Building Act issue, and it's only an issue when resource consents are required. The question that I still have at the bottom of my mind is, should resource consents be required when they're increasing the level of risk in an area like this? Because I can't for the life of me understand why we can't fix it. It's just beyond my comprehension.
To go on, it sounds a bit over the top, but it may just be the mechanism we could actually.
But how could we write a rule in here that says that a resource consent is required if it increases the level of risk? If any of the building works increase the level of risk in a floor level fill management area, or within a coastal inundation area?
I don't think it's as simple as it sounds, to be honest. Those people that are building the homes already have existing use rights.
No. This is not building. This is not building
exactly,
homes.
but repairs as well, and the insurance company recognises that.
They don't require They don't require building consents.
That's right. Because they have existing use rights as well.
No, it's not because they have existing use rights. That does not apply to building consents. That only applies to resource consents.
Yes.
So, just for the life of me, I can't understand why we would allow people to increase their level of risk, or to have their level of risk increased for them by their insurer or by EQC. It's just irresponsible.
Process that
We can look into
mitigate.
that. That's not a district plan issue, but I can.
But why
request.
isn't it? We're telling people what they can and can't do in particular areas. Why can't we tell people they can't increase their risk? Help me understand why we can't tell. We can tell them if they're building brand new that some things are non-complying, some things are, discretionary, some things are whatever. But we can't tell people that they can increase the risk for their property, even though we know that it could be sold at an increased risk later. Yep.
I'm just thinking under Section 71 of the Building Act, it talks about natural hazards, including inundation, I'm sure flooding as well. So if it was shown that your property was subject to a hazard, then you have to mitigate it before you can get a building consent.
Yeah, but they don't have to get one because they're only...
Yeah, so I don't know how, that's the only framework we have once the application comes in to do something. Without that, we don't know.
But if... Yeah, I know, but what I'm asking us, are we without the wit to work out what could be a resource consent requirement? Because it seems to me that this is the only place, the district plan is the only place where we can actually require people not to increase the risk.
We can look at this further, but my concern is that the Resource Management Act only deals with new development that's occurring.
Oh,
It's
I
not
know.
retrospective.
But the ministers have asked us, what are we doing about existing, residential and, we're going to move into this area in a minute, but, it just seems wrong to me that you can't protect actually people from what their insurers and what EQC are requiring them to do, which is increase their risk. How can that be right?
Because isn't everything that we do, the intent of what we do is to stop that from happening anyway. It's to manage that.
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
So
Why
you couldn't
couldn't
build
you?
new. You couldn't build new, and you couldn't. If you require a building consent, you couldn't do what they're doing.
Yeah.
But because you don't require a building consent,
It doesn't
you
trigger.
can increase the risk.
Yeah.
It's wrong.
Yeah, and it's an intent thing. I don't know whether you can look at that.
But can't we write a rule in here that simply says that, that given these areas, these maps, that in these areas you can't do anything to your property or to your residential property to increase the level of risk that you would be faced with? Can't we, please?
We may or
How
may
about
not.
it?
We may or may
could
not
be
be
a
able to.
can-do
We cannot-
organisation.
We cannot use the Building Act. We cannot use the Resource Management Act and the District Plan to control building. That is controlled under the Building Act. So we can't just insert a rule that essentially works around what would otherwise not require a building consent. So I think what we really need to do is talk to our residential building consent people and get a full understanding
But
of
we
what
have.
levers they can
We
and
have.
cannot
They
pull.
don't have existing use rights provisions. They don't have. If a building consent is not triggered, they can require nothing.
That's right.
So, and a building consent provision is only triggered at a certain level of structural change.
That's right.
So okay.
We just have to be a little bit careful too, because the building code is different to the MB guidelines, so it's
I
what you actually
understand.
do. So we have to be a bit careful which one we go to, and the MB guidelines are, they could allow that still to happen. I know.
Yeah, but the code's still
Some
inadequate in terms of
some
floor
repairs are
levels.
handled under the MB guidelines, not actually the building code.
All right. Okay, we'll stop beating a dead horse, tragically. Anyway, so you all ready to move on to the natural hazards chapter? Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much.